Hi, Jonathan York from Bay Financial Partners, looking at investment markets. Certainly September's been a pretty choppy month out there for global equity markets, but seeing a little bit of a sort of brief rally going into month end and obviously quarter end. And it's actually interesting now to see how much of that is just sort of window dressing as sort of fund managers, etc., get their right balances for quarter end. Quite interesting. Some of the really beaten up sectors, tech and the financials, banking sectors, have really started to come back in the last sort of couple of days. And so it's just going to be very interesting to see if that's going to be continued into October. Certainly, the US will get another reality check at the end of this week with the latest unemployment data. Over the last couple of months, that has sort of been rising in terms of jobs created. So, it has sort of shown the US is sort of creating more jobs and getting back to a more sort of normal stance. But obviously, coming from a very low base after the COVID sort of lockdown. We're very interesting as well to see the next round of earnings coming out of the US. Because certainly the sort of second quarter was anticipated to be pretty bad, and a lot of companies actually weren't quite as bad as expected, and those that were bad really gave a lot of the bad news because with the markets expecting it, that's what they got delivered. So it'll just be very interesting to see earnings in this third quarter, but also as well guidance going forward. Could potentially with the US economy sort of picking up and things not looking quite as sort of bleak as first anticipated. There could be a few surprises out there. Now, obviously in the US as well now, getting very close to that November 3rd election. We've got the first presidential candidate debate between Joe Biden and President Trump. And that's going to be very interesting given the recent revelations regarding President Trump's tax and sort of how little tax he's paid over the last sort of 15 odd years. When you add that to the COVID deaths in the US as well, that's just passed over another milestone now, just over 200,000 deaths. But possibly what is more worrying is the fact that states where cases were dropping is now starting to see an increase in cases as sort of schools and universities get back. There's also been controversy as well with sort of President Trump indicating that potentially on a contested election he sort of wouldn't go quietly and would sort of contest it till the very last. Now that's partially been dismissed by Republican leaders and sort of senior people within the Republican Party, saying that they will abide by the election result. Certainly in Europe and the UK as well, COVID is rearing its ugly head again. Potentially the sort of second wave. The UK sort of announcing some pretty drastic new measures, and potentially that could take them over the next sort of 6 months. Now, obviously, that has some pretty major implications out there, certainly for the economies. As you're going in and sort of spending coming up towards sort of Christmas time, obviously, there's going to be majorly impacted. Oil still trading sort of plus or minus $1 around that sort of $39 on WTI. But interesting, quite a few of the commodity prices are starting to edge up as we're starting to see, a bit of a recovery out there. Most notably, obviously, in China, which, the Chinese economy really has recovered pretty well from the sort of COVID shutdown and disruptions. A little bit closer to home in Australia, starting to see a slight easing there in the restrictions and sort of lockdown procedures in Victoria, and that is obviously on the back of cases falling dramatically. The rest of the states in Australia as well are starting to see easings, and even a little bit of talk now potentially about a sort of a trans-Tasman bubble between New Zealand and Australia by sort of year end. Now, obviously, if that was the case, it'd be a pretty major boost for both economies, really, because at present there's very little sort of tourism activity taking place from sort of overseas in Australia or in New Zealand. And if you did get that trans-Tasman bubble open, it really would make pretty big difference to the economies. Here in New Zealand, after the first leaders' debate, certainly National had a little bit of a sort of pick up in the polls. They gained around sort of four percentage points, but that's really not enough to sort of eat into Labor's lead. Although what was interesting is in the latest poll, it shows that Labor don't have enough majority out there to be able to rule alone. So on the latest polls, you need a Green Labour sort of coalition to be able to govern. The big winner out of the latest polls is obviously ACT, which is looking at maybe potentially 10 MPs in the next parliament. Now, in this low interest rate environment here in New Zealand, and technically we have negative interest rates in some of the swap rates and some of the government bonds. It's really sort of impacting on savers pretty majorly. In the last 6 months, you've seen a 6-month term deposit nearly halve in terms of the interest rate that's available. With this low interest rate environment, it's pretty interesting. Auckland City had a 30-year bond out there at 2.95% for 30 years. That's interesting because, now that's trading, it's already trading around sort of 2.6, so that's potentially around a sort of 6% capital gain on the issue price. So if you are looking for income, there are plenty of alternatives available out there, and if you're interested in discussing what is available, call us on 0800 867 323 or go to the website www.bayfinancialpartners.co.nz for lots of interesting articles, and we look forward to speaking to you soon.